Welcome to the Andy Staples Show, once again coming to you from the desert. And when I'm in the desert, I have to visit with Doug Haller, the Athletics Arizona State beat writer. And Doug, I think this is, we're at an event where the Pac-12's meeting, the Big 12's meeting, the Big 10's meeting. So there's a lot of big picture conversation going on. But I honestly can't think of a program that is more at the nexus of all the stuff that is going on than Arizona State. Like you wrote your state of the program story this week on Arizona State, and it was wild looking at the chart of how many first team guys that they thought when last season ended, they thought would be Arizona State players are somewhere else.
Yeah. Hi, Andy. It's pretty amazing. I think if you would start at the end of last year, and if you would have told the fan base that at the start of Herm Edwards' fifth season, you would be out without your quarterback, Jaden Daniels.
Yep.
One of your talented young running backs in Diamante Trainum. Your top two leading receivers in Ricky Pearsall, Elvie Bunkley Shelton. Your best defensive player in Jermaine Lole.
Yeah.
And
Jermaine Lole, the most recent addition to the portal, right? And the assumption is he winds up at USC. Is that?
I'm not sure. Okay. Jermaine Lole is an interesting case because as we speak right now, there's an ongoing, there are so many levels to this.
Yes.
Arizona State has not yet officially launched its collective, but they are active. And right now, their number one priority is to try to keep Jermaine Lole in Tempe. I don't know if they're going to win that battle, but he's in the portal. He's exploring his options. And then the last guy I just wanted to mention was Gentry, who was a freshman All-American. Now he is at USC, already signed and is, well on his way. We'll see how that unfolds this season.
So what makes this so interesting is this is a program, and we've talked about this on the show with regard to other programs. You're seeing it with Pittsburgh and Jordan Addison, who is in the portal now. And may wind up at USC also. But West Virginia's dealt with this. Programs at that level, kind of middle class, Power 5 type programs, are starting to feel like they're being treated as feeder schools. But Arizona State has that little cherry on top of there's the NCAA situation. It has caused a lot of turnover in the coaching staff. And I'm curious, Doug, and you've written about this a little bit. How much of the hesitancy to start an NIL collective to get that going is because they are kind of in the NCAA crosshairs right now?
It's certainly a factor. The push, I reported, maybe a month ago now that they were starting to put this thing together. But according to the people I talked to, Andy, there was a little reluctance to get involved because of where the program is right now.
Right.
I've covered Arizona State for about 12 years, and I've never seen the fan base this angry.
Yeah.
And it stems from, just the whole process. Last year, it really starts last year when Arizona State had, Jaden Daniels coming back.
Right.
Most of the offensive line, the entire defense. Everyone thought going into that season, this is the year we return to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
Arizona State hasn't been to the Rose Bowl in 25 years. So that team took the field with all that pressure, all those expectations on its shoulders. And then it started to kind of fall. They were sloppy, led the country in penalty yards for most of the season, only beat one team with a winning record. And, when you have that, when you don't perform up to the level people think you should, and then you have this NCAA investigation that's just kind of chipping away at your staff, there are a lot of people upset, and a lot of people weren't rushing to, start getting into this collective.
Antonio Pierce, defensive coordinator, Zach Hill, the offensive coordinator, they all kind of, caught up in this thing. And so massive turnover on the coaching staff. Some of the accusations against them, if true, some of the dumbest incidences of trying to get around NCAA rules that you have ever heard, which is, and I think a lot of it is other schools, other coaches were more insulted by the fact that they were continuing to recruit on campus during the pandemic, while everybody kind of had a gentleman's agreement, like, hey, look, there's a rule, but people don't always follow the rules. But there was a gentleman's agreement, I think, among coaches, like, you're not going to actually have people on your campus and in your facility during COVID, right?
Well, yeah. And, for the state of the program, we talked to opposing coaches, get like a scouting report. The first I talked to, the first coach I said was, brought up that very issue. The other thing, Andy, is during, you remember the Pac-12 and the Big Ten,
Yep.
they paused for a long time. And during that whole process, Herm Edwards was out front of this whole thing saying, this is the right thing to do. We need to follow the science. We need to do what's safe for everybody.
Right.
Ray Anderson was also out front when they
This is
made the
AD, yeah.
announcement. When they made the announcement, when the Pac-12 made the announcement, Ray Anderson was right there with them.
Mm-hmm.
Take this seriously. And then to do that while allegedly having recruits on campus, and doing things that were blatantly against the rules. I mean, at minimum, it's a bad look. And if everything is proved to be true, it was just very, it was just silly.
Ham-handed would be the
right.
That's the thing. I mean, you listeners of this podcast know I'm not real precious about the NCAA rules, and I assume that they're being fractured at any point in time. But don't do it in a dumb way. That's my general rule of thumb. Like do it in a smart way where there's a lot of ways to do it where you won't get caught. They didn't do it that way.
No, and what did they gain from it? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, they had some recruiting momentum up to that point, but it just backfired on them, and now we're in that waiting period of whenever the NCAA decides.
That's what I'm curious about, because I know a lot of the blame for the transfers is going to NIL, but how much of it is the staff turnover also?
I talked to the parent of one transfer, and he said that was the very reason. The guy who recruited him, his position coach, is no longer there. He didn't feel comfortable. He didn't feel like he had that same trust factor. So that's one. It's half the staff almost.
Yeah.
The two coordinators. Antonio Pierce had his hand. He was also the recruiting coordinator.
Right.
He had his hand in just about every major recruit that Arizona State has had during the Herm Edwards era. So I think that's a huge part of it. And then, but the NIL thing is for the bigger guys, definitely is the lead factor.
Right. And it's one of those things that you've got to have something ready, up and running. And actually the Pac-12, you've seen USC lose a player or not get a player that it wanted, or recruit that it wanted, because they're not up and running really. Oregon is the most up and running of the Pac-12 schools as far as NIL goes. It's no coincidence Oregon probably also has the most complete roster in the Pac-12.
Yeah, well, then Washington State has one going. Arizona has one.
Washington State got Cameron Ward from Incarnate Word. Now it helps that they hired his head coach from Incarnate Word as the OC, but they also put together a deal, and he goes there instead of Ole Miss.
Yeah. I mean, it's a factor, and it really bothers Arizona State fans that Arizona is up and running. And also, just to get more into the NIL thing, you have your school president, Michael Crow,
yes,
who goes on public radio, and Michael Crow kind of has always had this vision of turning Arizona State football into Stanford,
right?
Doing things the right way.
Wouldn't you have to turn Arizona State and Stanford first?
Probably so. Yeah.
I don't know that all those online classes are gonna turn it into Stanford. So
yeah.
Michael may be a little off on that.
Michael Crow has always been vocal about not paying crazy salaries to assistant coaches, or any coach really. And when Mike Norvell was offensive coordinator, Arizona State gave him a base salary of $900,000, which
right.
People were amazed at that time. They haven't done that since, but he's always been like, we're going to do this the right way. So when he said that he wasn't a fan of the direction this is going, he kind of set, Arizona State's agenda, and everyone kind of fell in line with that.
It's a bad idea to say anything like that in a public forum, because it will be used against you by other schools that will say to the player, well, they don't think you should get anything. Like they want to keep money from you. And that's a powerful repellent, unfortunately, even if it's not really what he wasn't saying they shouldn't do it. He was saying he wasn't a fan of it.
Yeah. What happened was it was one of the local radio stations had a newsmaker week in Arizona State. That is their radio station, their affiliate. And, Michael Crow was on one day and Ray Anderson was on the next day. And, Ray Anderson was asked the same question.
Yeah.
And he said, we're going to do what we can, but he basically said we're going to sell
the developmental
the pro model.
Why is the ex-agent saying that? Why? That makes no sense.
In Arizona State's defense, they do have 3 NFL head coaches in Herm Edwards.
That's true.
Marvin Lewis, who is more involved than most people realize, and then they recently hired Brian Billick as an offensive analyst.
Right.
However, every major program in the country is developing players for the NFL at a much better rate than Arizona State. So,
guess what? Alabama's better at developing you for the NFL, and they're probably going to give you some dough. They don't advertise it because they don't really need to.
Right. So there's just kind of a collective eye roll from the fan base to hear that at this point.
Well, so Ray Anderson's an interesting character in all this because he made a decision when he got hired that was panned at the time that I think a year or so in, everybody's feeling pretty good about. But you went back in March, and there's a really good story on The Athletic. You need to read all of it. Doug writes about Arizona State and the Suns, by the way. But really good story from March 4th in The Athletic, where he went back to Ray Anderson's press conference right after he fired Todd Graham, because that was one of the first things Ray Anderson did after getting hired as the AD. And he fires Todd Graham. And the original idea was they had Billy Napier as the OC, Phil Bennett as the DC. They're going to bring in Herm Edwards, these two very experienced coordinators, who were very good at their jobs, were going to kind of guide him through the early part of his college football head coaching experience. And then they immediately left.
Yeah. The Herm Edwards or the Ray Anderson press conference, when I went back and looked at it, was very, I mean, when you go back and look at it, you realize like, okay, it's obvious he's going to hire Herm Edwards.
Yes.
This was the day Todd Graham was fired. No one really knew.
He was Herm's agent.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It was obvious. But he did say there were two kind of eyebrow raising moments during that press conference. The first is that, he wanted to bring back the coordinators, which that should have been, everyone should have realized.
Yeah.
Everyone should have realized then that it was going to be someone from the NFL or at least NFL ties. The other thing is when he laid out the program expectations, Ray Anderson came into that press conference. He had his talking points written out, gave an opening statement, went through all of them. And then toward the end of the 30 minutes, someone asked him a question, and that's when he laid out, like, we should be top 15 nationally, top 3 in the Pac-12 every year. And really
pretty bold
for Arizona State. Yes. Yeah. And I don't blame him for saying we need to shoot higher, but the fact that he was so specific with it, Andy, Herm Edwards walked into that, and ever since then, he's been trying to live up to it.
Yeah.
And, maybe they've been building a little bit if you look at the win-loss record, but now with the, the NCAA investigation hanging over.
So his decision on firing Todd Graham, though, having talked to him a little bit about why that decision was made, why it was made, when it was made, he read that situation perfectly. He read it correctly with Todd Graham. And I think that's been proven. What you saw from Todd Graham in Hawaii, where he basically got run off because he doesn't know how to treat players. Like, he would have been horrendous for Arizona State in the NIL transfer portal era. He would have been awful. But it's interesting when you look back, because one of those coordinators went on to become a head coach, and a very good one in the 3 years he was at the next stop, as Billy Napier. He's at Florida now. He was at Louisiana when he left Arizona State and was a very good first-time head coach. How different might things be had they just said, Billy Napier, we're promoting you to head coach?
You've been around assistants where you can just tell, like, this guy's going to go on and be a great head coach.
Exactly.
Billy Napier was that guy.
Yeah,
it wasn't like no one really knew what Billy Napier was going to become. Then I think everyone in the program,
they knew it with Norvell too. Yeah,
they did. And everyone knew that he was going to go on and do big things. Who's going to stick around in that situation? And I think Billy knew that he was going to have some options, but had Billy stuck around, I think it would have been a different situation. Obviously, you could just tell from the moment he arrived that, he was going to do big things.
So I'm curious, because I remember coming out here in 2019, and it felt like this was a program on the upswing. They had some young offensive linemen they were really excited about. Jaden was going into his sophomore year. The pandemic hits in 2020. If that's a normal season, I wonder if the trajectory of the program is different, because it felt like everything was kind of pushing toward that season.
That is a great question. A lot, I think, depends on Jaden. Everything with Jaden Daniels, what he did as a freshman in 2019, beating Oregon, or beating Michigan State on the road. People were talking about him as, a future Heisman, in that category. And then, he just started that 2020 season, Brandon Ayuk, first round draft pick, is gone.
Really good player. Benjamin. I mean, think about the skill talent that you're dealing with. Frank Darby. Yep.
6th round NFL draft pick. Comes back 2020. All those guys are gone. He has a young receiving core, mostly 4-star guys. So they have some talent to them, but they just didn't, they just weren't on the same page. And at the time, it wasn't clear whether it was like, okay, is it the young receivers or is it Jaden? And then last year, I think, Jaden, he just hasn't been the same quarterback since. I mean,
Yeah,
he hasn't been that
he's
guy.
he's at LSU now. I don't think he's going to be the starter at LSU. And it's a weird thing because he would have been the starter at Arizona State. And you look at who they have now. I don't know that they feel particularly comfortable with anybody they have. Emory Jones took a visit, the Florida transfer,
Yep.
And we'll see if Emory winds. It's very interesting because Emory and Jaden, like body type similar, their throwing style is like their throwing motion is very similar.
Yeah.
They're both pretty quick, and so it feels like you could put Emory in with these guys and they'd feel like they were playing with a familiar person. I know this is a new offense that they're all learning anyway, but it's interesting that was the choice Jaden Daniels made, because he then goes to a place where there were no guarantees, and he might not even be the backup at LSU.
Yeah, they have a pretty intense three-way battle going on there right now,
Yeah.
it sounds like. And I think what they really like potentially about Emory Jones is just the ability to extend plays, which is what, last year they struggled passing the ball. One of the worst passing seasons they've had in quite a few years. But the one thing, when things broke down, Jaden could, extend plays, make something happen.
Yep.
And with the 5 guys that they have right now, they just don't have that.
Yeah, they got Paul Tyson, who's the Alabama transfer, who is Bear Bryant's great grandson. Yeah. But and so if Emory, because I know he's looking at a few places, but if he doesn't come, who's the starting quarterback at Arizona State?
That's a good question. I know they're looking at another potential transfer. If they go, but I mean, gosh, what transfer? I mean, if you're Emory Jones, do you go to a place? I mean, Andy, their leading receiver right now had 13 catches last year.
Yeah, that's the issue, and you don't know about the offense, and you're breaking in a first-year coordinator, but I would think the opportunity is there because you're playing in the Power 5, you're playing against good competition. If you're confident in yourself and you feel like, hey, I want to show whoever my old team was what I can do, or show the world, show the NFL what I can do, there's an opportunity there.
Yeah.
Now, granted, whoever that person is has to have been in the portal. They have to have submitted their name to the portal by this past Sunday. So they're either in there or they're not right now.
Right. And that's, I mean, I think Herm Edwards knew that. I mean, the first day of spring practice, he only talked to us twice during the spring, the first day and the last day. On the first day, he said, he just brought up the question, like, our quarterback may not even be in the building, which I think it's natural to wonder that, but to say it publicly, as you can see, Arizona State says some really strange things publicly.
They do.
It just kind of hung over spring practice the entire time. And, I know there were some pretty upset people.
So what is the timeline? I asked this fully knowing there may be no answer to it. What is the timeline on the NCAA investigation, and do they think there's a resolution anytime soon?
From what I've heard, the investigation is ongoing. As of last week, I don't think they've talked to Herm Edwards yet.
Oh, wow.
And I guess that's pretty
standard. They get their ducks in a row before they talk to the major, because they want to do it once and be done with it.
So here's what we have against you, basically. Defend yourself. So, I mean, there's a feeling among Arizona State that maybe that the worst is behind them. And there was a spirit, there's always an enthusiasm on the first day of spring. But usually, toward practice, 12, 13, 14, that it was there.
Wanes.
It was there 1 through 15.
That's good.
I felt like the team feels like the worst is behind him. Last year, it was always like, when's Antonio Pierce?
Say that would be a weird cloud. You had, assistants suspended for a year, that sort of thing. Like that's a hard way to operate.
Right. Yeah. And they just didn't know. I mean, last year they had 3 assistants who were suspended before the season, but the 2 coordinators hung around for the entire year. And it was always the question, like, especially with Antonio Pierce, how much longer is he going to be around? Is Herm Edwards going to be around?
Right.
So, to answer your question, they haven't interviewed Herm yet. I don't know if there's going to be any sort of resolution throughout the season.
So how do they recruit going forward? That's the other big question.
They have not recruited well since all this started, at least, with the high school kids. heavy with the transfers. I mean, and
Yeah.
really the transfer portal is saving them
and gutting them at the same time.
It's such a weird dynamic. I mean, because they are losing a lot. They've done a great job. You know, they brought in Xavier Valade from Wyoming,
Right.
pretty talented running back. You mentioned Paul Tyson.
They just got an Iowa State transfer to play center, right?
Joey Ramos, who will probably be in that battle. They brought in 4 offensive linemen. So, you know, it's fine. The transfer portal is great for filling holes,
Right.
but if you're using it to keep your program afloat, you're going to run into trouble, and that's where they are.
So, what do you think about the future for Herm Edwards? It seems like Ray Anderson is safe, and Michael Crow, you mentioned before. You know, normally we don't talk about university presidents in this context, but he's pretty hands-on as far as athletics goes. He's pretty hands-on in the administration of the Pac-12 as well. So I imagine that, you know, he has some pretty strong opinions about how that program is going to be run. How safe are Herm and Ray Anderson right now?
Yeah, you're right about Michael Crow. He is very involved in the investigation, obviously. The fact, you know, a lot of people have told me that who know Michael Crow very well have told me that if it was any other coach, he would have suspended them when the investigation first started, or they would already be gone. The fact that he's still around tells me it's one or two things. One, they actually think, despite what The Athletic has reported, despite what others have reported, that Herm Edwards' involvement in all this is minimal.
Right.
And you know, this is the way a lot of people lean, is that by making a decision to fire Herm Edwards, it would force Michael Crow to make a decision
on Ray
Anderson.
Yeah.
And that's something that Michael Crow does not want to do. He's very loyal to his department heads. Ray Anderson, in fairness, has done a lot of great things for Arizona State. He's been involved at the very high levels of the Pac-12. I mean, I think his name was, you know, I don't know if he was a serious candidate for the ACC commissioner's job.
Yeah.
I mean, he was involved. His name was connected to that. But I just don't think that's a decision that Michael Crow wants to make.
Yeah, that's the toughest part. But the problem is, the longer this drags on, the harder it is for this program to prepare for its future. That's what I wonder, because, you know, how long can it operate kind of in purgatory before something really bad happens or something has to change?
Yeah, I've never thought that Ray Anderson would ever fire Herm just because of their history. If that's going to have to come from Michael Crow.
Could Herm himself say, I don't want to be in the way anymore?
Right.
Yeah.
And Herm would never force Ray to fire him.
Right.
I think I was leaning toward, and a lot of people thought that Herm would have stepped down after last season.
Yeah.
In fact, after the final regular season game, I was sitting in the front row of the media room. It was after they beat Arizona. Herm answered some questions about coming back, and as he stood up, he just kind of looked at me and muttered and said, "You thought I was leaving." So I think I would be surprised if Herm doesn't step down after this year. He doesn't want to. I think he wants one last chance to kind of get the program back up and running. You know, he's 68 years old.
Well, and how much does Arizona, seeming to have really done a good job hiring Jedd Fisch, because they were in a terrible position.
Yeah.
You know, at that Territorial Cup in 2020, you saw how low that program had gotten. But it feels like Jedd Fisch is come in and recruited well and has a plan. And like that feels like something that turns up the heat a little bit on Arizona State.
The best thing Jedd Fisch has done is just, you know, the enthusiasm for that program is so high right now with the fan base. And, you know, man, they really bottomed out. I mean, especially after that 70-7 game.
I watched that thing. It was horrible.
Bad.
It was depressing to watch. Like,
that team gave up.
Felt so bad for everyone involved with the University of Arizona on that day. But it's crazy to think, you know, if you're Arizona State on that day, you're thinking, we're going to own this rivalry for decades now.
Yeah.
And it's just not going to be that way.
It'll be interesting to see when the Pac-12 media poll comes out in July. I mean, I don't know how much stock you put in those things. I don't know.
Not much. Remember when Nebraska was the trendy pick for the Big Ten West title in 2019?
Right.
Yeah. I don't put any stock in that. We're morons. But let's be honest.
That is true. It will be interesting to see if the conference kind of views that how much Arizona has closed the gap on Arizona State, or if they've actually passed them.
I see. I have a hard time saying that they passed them, because Jedd got them to play hard last year, but there still has to be evidence of of a roster that is capable of being competitive in the Pac-12 South. It seems from recruiting rankings that that's on the way, but we don't know that. We don't know until we see them.
Yeah, and the gap was pretty significant.
Exactly.
No doubt about that. I would agree with that. But at the same time, I would think, a lot depends on how the season goes for Arizona State. If they lose early, I could see this kind of snowballing, and by the time that game comes around, who knows?
Does Lincoln Riley being at USC change the dynamics as well? Because it feels like now the Pac-12 South, and I haven't said Utah or Kyle Whittingham once, and I feel bad because all he does
isn't that always the case?
A great
Everyone's
program
always
that wins
apologizing
games over and over again
for not giving Kyle Whittingham more credit.
It's crazy. But I mean, that's the thing. They kicked Oregon's ass twice last year. Like, they earned that conference title. You got them. They're going to be what they are every year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what you're getting out of Utah, but now you have Lincoln Riley at USC. It feels like if you are Herm Edwards, if you're Jed Fish, if you're Carl Durrell, if you're Chip Kelly, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the disappointment just from last year for Arizona State, because, when USC was down during the Clay Helton years, you had someone had to take advantage of it. And to Utah's credit, they surged.
Absolutely.
No one else did. I expected Chip Kelly and UCLA to kind of make a run. That didn't happen. But it was really Arizona State was the school that everyone thought that, they're going to take advantage of this, and they never did.
I was sure after seeing them in the fall of 2019, and again, this probably goes back to my, if the pandemic had never happened question, maybe things are different. But I really thought they were in a good spot. It felt like their trajectory was headed up, and they were going to be, a competitive program in the Pac-12 South, especially until USC made a coaching change.
Yeah, no, you were there, right? I mean, they were really doing well.
Once they beat Oregon that year, that because Oregon was the best roster in the league at that point. Oregon was the best team in the league. They won the league that year.
They went to California has always been kind of the recruiting area that, well, under Todd Graham, it just went away, but they got that up and running, and it seemed like everything was going in the right direction. Antonio Pierce once actually said that, Arizona State was going to be a national recruiting powerhouse. That didn't age well, but
okay, here's my thing. And I realize they don't have the donor passion, the NIL, like the capabilities.
You're not going to bring up the sleeping giant thing, are you?
I'm not going to bring up the sleeping giant, but listen, you land at Sky Harbor, you go over to Tempe. That's a wonderful place. Like, it blows my mind that they can't get more. And Ari Wasserman and I have talked about this a bunch. Ari's an Arizona grad. He thinks that both Arizona schools really miss out by not just going to every 4-star offensive lineman in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and just bringing them in on an official visit and being like, you could live here.
Yeah. I don't know. It's been the storyline since I've been around in Arizona. Why can't Arizona State capitalize?
It's not that easy to make anybody move 2,000 miles. That's
well, and it's also the flip side of it. Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, right now we're about maybe low 90s right now. It still feels nice, but they're going to be out on the field in August. I talked to a high school coach about this very topic not too long ago. He goes, I don't know how many kids want to go out there in August and practice in 105-degree weather.
Doug, I grew up in Central Florida, and our 95 is worse than your 105. It's okay. You
can survive.
You deal with it.
So. But I mean, you're right. They've upgraded their facilities to not. I mean, they're not going to be on Oregon or Texas A&M's level, but they're competitive.
Yeah.
They have a lot of things going for them. Your question is a great one. What would have happened if the pandemic would not have affected the 2020
It really did
season?
feel like
because
they
were heading
perfect.
They were heading that direction.
Yeah. It's sad to see it this way because we talked about this. I talked about this with David Ubben on the show the other day. There are certain schools that it feels like are being more negatively affected by all of the changes than others. And Pittsburgh, you're seeing it now. They just won the ACC. How can you lose your best player? You just won a Power 5 conference. Like, how can this happen? And West Virginia has dealt with this, but Arizona State, same situation where you don't want to be kind of thrust into a different class in your own league.
Yeah, and you have to ask the question: what do you want to be? Do you want to be a school that has great success in all the Olympic sports, which Arizona State has had success there, but or do you want to put a lot more resources into football?
Yeah.
And pay the coaches that you need to pay, the salaries that you need to pay them, It's a bad time because, the basketball program is struggling a little bit. The baseball
Right.
program, who has such a great tradition,
Yeah.
not doing well either. So yeah, there's just not a lot of Ray Anderson fans out there
Listen,
right
I have a theory. Nobody
now. By all
believes me.
means.
They did Sparky dirty. Like, if they didn't do that to Sparky, if Sparky's there on the helmet every game, best helmet logo in college football, and they're like, nah, how about a pitchfork?
Yeah, you're not alone. You're not alone on that. Sparky still has. They pull out Sparky a couple times a year, and that's all you're going to see on social media is about bringing Sparky back.
Well, Pitt was the same way, where when they had the gold and the navy, and you're like, that's not your colors. Like, you have this beautiful yellow and royal blue. Like, wear what Tony Dorsett wore, and they did. They went back to it, and they won the ACC. Now, as I'm telling you, bring Sparky back. Going to the Pac-12 title game.
That's an
transfers be damned.
Yeah, I mean the tradition. There are people who don't like the black uniforms Arizona State wears. I mean,
everybody needs to have a black uniform, unless you're
a black
Alabama
helmet,
or
right.
Penn State or whatever. You need a black uniform. Players love it. I don't have a problem with that.
I agree with that.
But put Sparky on a black helmet.
Yeah. My wife's
awesome.
my wife's an Arizona State grad, and even she complains about Sparky. So you're not alone with that theory.
All right. Well, I'm glad to know I'm right. That's the most important part of this podcast, is finding out that I'm right. So, Doug, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and your town is fantastic.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Thank you, sir.